Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the MyNHD featuring series. This is a series of webinars that are designed to bring you knowledge and information that you can use to improve your business and help you transact a little bit more easily and hopefully more smoothly, and even maybe transact a little bit more. You might even close more transactions by watching our webinars in the MyNHD featuring series. So do remember to watch our webinars often. And please do remember us for all of your residential, lease, commercial, and new home disclosure needs. Today we have Scott Rockline, the COO of MyNHD, and Chief John Morgan from CalFire. They're going to be talking about AB 38, defensible space, and what's coming up with SB 63. So Scott, take it away.
Well, thank you, Dee Dee, and welcome, John. And so we're going to try to help everyone navigate these new fire laws and also the new car form that's out. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen so we can get into this. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Dee Dee's going to monitor that so we can address those at the end. So let's get to this. The first thing I'd like to show the audience is just the percentage of high and very high fire hazard severity zones throughout the state of California. Just to put in perspective, there's a significant portion of our state that is at potential risk for fire. So I think this slide always kind of is an eye opener for everyone. But what we're here for is dealing with Assembly Bill 38. And, the basic questions, what do you have to do to be in compliance? When do you have to use car form FHDS, all right? How do you know what sections to fill out? And when do you order the defensible space inspection, right? These are the basic questions that are surrounding Assembly Bill 38. So getting into this, I like to give a little checklist, right? And we've designed our reports, our NHD reports, working with CalFire to help navigate this. So step one, you're a listing agent, right? Order your MyNHD report, okay? Just order the report at listing. There's never a charge to you, the agent. We only get paid when escrow closes, right? We're a HUD item. So order the NHD report and then look for the AB 38 advisory page right after the invoice, right? I'm going to skip forward. So this is right in our report, this AB 38 notice, and it has a link to the CalFire site right on it. So if your property that you're representing is in any one of the 3 potential fire zones that qualify for AB 38, this page will print. It's right after the invoice, right? If your property is not in a qualifying fire zone, you won't see this page. So it's a very clear notice that the property's in a qualifying fire zone and there's more to do here, okay? Then check the disclosure summary page. That's the following page. This will also show you which particular fire zone the property is in. I'll show you that slide in a moment. And then to deal with the home hardening section, right? So there's 2 sections of AB 38. There's defensible space inspections and there's home hardening. And if the property is in a fire zone, from a home hardening perspective, you have to determine when the property was built. If it was built prior to January 1st of 2010, right, this is when construction codes changed in California. So any property older than that, then the home qualifies for the home hardening section of car form FHDS, all right? So what next, right? And we showed you this, the AB 38 notice, and here's the summary page, right? And you can see right here in a very high fire hazard severity zone, AB 38, the property is, yes, in a state level fire zone. It's also in a supplemental fire zone, AB 38, at a local level. So this property clearly is in a fire severity zone that qualifies for AB 38, right? All right, so what do you do next? Well, the default with regards to the defensible space inspection is for the seller, right? The default is for the seller to request the defensible space inspection for that property, right? And what we're telling everybody to do is to go to the CalFire site to start this process. I'm going to bring that site up in just a moment, right? But the website, www.fire.ca.gov, calfire.gov/dspace. This is the CalFire site where you'll order defensible space inspections, right? And then CalFire will help you navigate what to do next. So let's escape out of here and let's jump right into, and I'm going to stop sharing for one moment. We're going to jump into the CalFire site, back to sharing screen. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Morgan. And John, we're now, we know we have a property that's in a fire zone that qualifies for AB 38. The listing agents have to order the defensible space inspection. We're now at your site. Why don't you walk us through it?
All right, thanks, Scott. Again, I'm John Morgan. I'm the Deputy Chief of Wildfire Preparedness for CalFire. And for all of you here on this call, we have created this webpage, and we really want you to focus on that nice orangish yellow rectangle right in the center bottom there. And that's the link right there to request your real estate defensible space inspection. And what you can do is when you go into that, it is going to take you to our survey. So it's going to ask you a question like, are you sure you want to leave, man? And yes, you do. Something to notice right off the top, we do have a link to the state, to CalFire's Fire Hazard Severity Zone map. And then we have a list of 5 counties that we partnered with that have their own request portal for this particular documentation. So if you're selling in any one of these counties, you'll want to just take this link straight there. Don't worry if you're in any other jurisdiction or that jurisdiction for that matter, we're going to get your information to the right place. The rest of this first page is some important information, question answer type stuff. And then the following page is about the information for the requester. Notice it's saying property owner information. I emphasize that on purpose. You might remember from college or high school that when the teacher says something twice, it's probably on the test. If you want your agent information included there, Scott, if you'll click on the yes for will someone be present for the inspection, and just I know it asks about the property owner, but if you want your agent information as the seller's agent to be included here, you would click agent, and that's when you would be able to enter your name, your email address, your phone number, and you would be CC'd in all of the correspondence related to this request. This becomes important when this documentation of compliance comes through and escrow is pending, right? You wish you had that documentation, but the seller hasn't checked their email in 2 days. You get where I'm headed. So that's the way you would put your information here. The rest of it, once you move past this, is just location information. You're going to put the address of the property where you're requesting this documentation of compliance. There's a nice video if you want to watch it. You can see me tell you how to work with the map, but you can just type your address right there on the top left of the map. It'll drill down to the property location. And that's where you would just confirm that the property is, in fact, the one we're talking about and the one that you're hoping to get documentation of compliance for. And then once you're through that, it just it comes down to if we already have completed the evaluation or inspection, then the system will send that to the emails listed in the first page, or second page, the information page, sends it as a PDF document as soon as we get the request. It can take up to 24 hours depending on how these computers, sometimes I wonder if they've got a hamster back there just spinning the wheels of the computer. But if there has not been an inspection already completed, then your client would be contacted by a CalFire or other department representative, and an inspection would be scheduled with those individuals. And it's just that easy. Scott just did the whole process right there in front of us.
And I type with 2 fingers.
Right. Yeah, once you get it down, you can do that in about 35 seconds.
All right. So John, we've now requested the inspection, right? And most folks don't know whether this is your jurisdiction or not. So what's going to happen? Let's say we're in a CalFire jurisdiction.
Hey, Scott, I had a computer glitch there. Just like I said, the hamster, I guess, is running slow in my computer. Could you repeat that question for us?
I'm sorry. Yeah, and there's a lot of, just to be honest, a lot of thunderstorm activity through California. So this might, just interrupt us a little bit. So we've submitted the request, right? And because a couple of things can happen depending on whether you're in CalFire's jurisdiction or not. You want to walk us through that?
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I kind of alluded to it in the beginning there, but let's say you're not sure if this house really requires this. You're not sure if you're in CalFire's jurisdiction. Maybe you're not in CalFire's jurisdiction. The great thing about this particular platform is we have linked this to send the request information to all of the different jurisdictions within the state. So if it's a jurisdiction, maybe it's a small fire protection district within the state, maybe it's a city, San Diego, for instance, maybe it's Los Angeles or Los Angeles County, those different jurisdictions that are outside of CalFire's boundaries. This system will forward that request to those entities, and then they will have your contact information. And when you get our confirmation email after you hit submit, you saw Scott sign the page and hit submit. Right after that, it's going to send you a confirmation email. And within that email, it's going to tell you right off the bat, either yes, you're in CalFire's jurisdiction, or you're not. Yes, this property requires this documentation of compliance, or it doesn't. And we give you contact information for the individuals closest to you. So if it's a CalFire jurisdiction, then we're going to give you the CalFire local unit phone number and their email address. If it's a jurisdiction that's not CalFire, we're going to give you that jurisdiction. We're going to give you that phone number and their contact email address if we have it. We do for most of them, as far as a public contact goes. And so that's how robust this is and easy to work with if you really take and pay attention to the details in that confirmation email. And for an agent, while it's the seller's responsibility to fill this out and get it done, if your agent information is included in there, then you'll have a copy of all of that information, that correspondence, and you'll be able to help walk your client through that process.
So again, for you listing agents out there, we already told you step one, order the MyNHD report. You'll see the AB 38 notification page. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. So this tells you, yes, you're in the CalFire, you're in a fire zone that is triggering AB 38. And you order then the defensible space inspection from the CalFire site. The link is right here to go to that site. We walked you through that process. So then this is why it's so good to start here, because CalFire then tells you, yes, you're in our jurisdiction. We'll schedule that inspection for you. Or no, you're not in a CalFire jurisdiction. You're in a local jurisdiction, and here's the contact information for you. Now, I bring up this page also because at the bottom of this page, we also give you the 2 closest fire stations to the subject property right on this AB 38 notification page, right? So then in that case, then you have to reach out to the local fire departments and find out, number one, are they requiring the defensible space inspections? If they are, schedule it, right? And number 2, if they're not, then get something, either get an email from them or get the contact information of who you spoke with for your records where they're telling you, no, we're not requiring an inspection on this property. Get some sort of record for you for your protection when they tell you they're not requiring the inspection. Okay, so let's move along. We talked about this. We talked about the property itself. We went to the CalFire site, right? We just talked about reaching out to your local fire department. Okay, so we already talked about this from the perspective of the seller. The seller's agent is the default for the defensible space inspection. And if that's the case, it's got to be done pre-close. You have to get that inspection requested and performed and that certificate prior to close, right? However, you can transfer the responsibility to the buyer, right? And we can use we've got CAR form FHDS for this purpose, section 3 on the CAR form. So if it's the seller taking responsibility, it's a pre-close item. If the buyer takes responsibility, they have 1 full year after the close to get an inspection performed. And the reason for that is they're in a high fire zone, and these inspections, these defensible space inspections, are not new to AB 38. All of us that live in these high fire zones have to get these inspections performed every year. Every May for me is a tree trimming and weed whacking party, because I have to get my property prepared because I get my inspection in early June and I'm not selling my home. So, these home owners and sellers living in these high fire areas, we understand this. These inspections are required. So the person buying that property, we're educating them that this is going to be part of their normal process going forward.
Right. Yeah, these inspections, you make a good point. The inspection's been around since 1965.
65. That's incredible. We've owned property up in the mountains for about 25 years, and they've been a part of our life, the whole time. So again, I think that's important that AB 38 didn't trigger the inspections. They triggered the need to provide the inspection evidence to any potential buyer of your property, right? And as you see here on CAR form FHDS section 3, right there, you can see that there's buyer responsibility for local vegetation or seller's responsibility, and buyer or seller for state responsibility. That's just telling you if it's a local jurisdiction or a state level jurisdiction, i.e. CalFire, then this is where you check a box and then all parties sign the form to either have the seller accept the responsibility or for the buyer to accept the responsibility for these inspections, okay? All right. Now, there is one other thing that is a possibility, right? And John mentioned this when I was doing the application on the site for the inspection. There's the possibility that last year's inspection exists because we, as property owners in these high fire zones, have to do this every year. I have my inspection certs on file. So one of the things you might want to do is simply ask the seller, right? Do you have a copy of your inspection certificate from last year's inspection? And John, how long previous to the sale are they good for?
Yeah, these are good for 6 months prior to the sale. So any inspection that had been completed within the prior 6 months, that's why I always tell agents when they ask me, when should I order this? I say, well, as soon as your client says they're thinking about listing their property, have them fill it out, get it started. That way, if they have this done and their home sells within 6 months, we're golden, and you've already got the documentation.
All right. And if you have, John, if you have the documentation online from prior year and an agent or a seller is requesting the inspection online, will you notify them that there's a certificate from prior year that exists?
Absolutely. If it's within 6 months of the request, we'll let them know that what we do is we don't even say, hey, we've already done this. We go ahead and send the documentation of compliance up front. So there's no wait. Like I said, it does take time for these these requests to go through the system and get processed by the computer. So I like to tell people to, just wait a good 24 hours or so. And if you don't hear anything in that first 24 hours, you're likely going to be contacted to schedule an appointment because the computer didn't find anything for that property. And then we try to contact you within 7 days. And when I say you, whoever the owner's information is there, we try to contact them, make sure they're going to be present or their designee. And, because we want to see them face to face and take that opportunity to make it an educational experience rather than an enforcement experience.
Excellent. So again, just to pound the point home, when you start off, you order the MyNHD report. We tell you that the property is AB 38, qualifying. That you go to the CalFire site, and if there's a certificate on file, CalFire will send that to you. And again, then that complies with the requirement, and you use CalFire FHDS Section 4, where the final inspection report exists. Click that off. Copy of the inspection form along with CalFire FHDS. You sign it, and you're good to go for the defensible space portion of AB 38. This is a good place, by the way, to pause. And Dee Dee, if you're there, have you been monitoring the question and answer? It's in the chat. Do you have any for us?
I have been. I've been typing a few, and a couple are really good that we might want to just talk about.
So let's stop sharing for a moment and let's do that.
Yeah. So one person said, and this is where I think a lot of agents and sellers get hung up. So filling this out, I think they mean the defensible inspection form from CalFire. So filling this out will help the seller gain knowledge if it is or is not in a local vegetation management ordinance. So then the seller can fill out the FHDS section 3.8, fill it out correctly. This has been a challenge for sellers.
Yeah, I hear you. The FHDS is, I like the fact that
confusing.
Lots of instructions on the second 2 pages to help you fill out the first 2 pages. But that's a great point, and I know it can be confusing. But let's try to kind of look at it this way. One fact is that throughout California, inspections are provided. So you're going to see things like, are inspections provided in this area? And the answer is yes, honestly. Either a local jurisdiction is providing the inspection, CalFire is providing the inspection. We even have the federal Forest Service agencies providing inspections in federal lands. So it's very rare to find a place in California that provides no inspection at all. So that's something to just remember, that we're providing inspections everywhere. Now, something to try and figure out though is it the state or a local jurisdiction that's providing the inspections? So you can rest assured that if you're in a incorporated city or something of that nature, it's likely going to be the local jurisdiction that provides the inspection. That's the entity that would ultimately provide the documentation of compliance. But if you're in a more rural area, say it's an unincorporated portion of a county, things out in that wildland urban interface, you know, you're up in the foothills, you're out in the forest, it's likely going to be CalFire who provides that inspection service out there.
Pretty much if you're in the state responsibility area, correct? Right, and that's why the
Yeah.
SRA is one of the disclosures on the NHD reports.
Right. And that map, when you fill it out, it'll tell you in the confirmation email, it tells you whether or not that house is in a certain fire hazard severity zone. But it also, and this is what I really love about this product too, is that your documentation tells you up front that whether they're in a fire hazard, you know, a high fire hazard severity zone or a very high fire hazard severity zone. And I know you'll get to it later, but whether it's in a state or a local high or very high fire hazard severity zones, that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. We, you know, the NHD companies, by the way, not all of them have the local fire zones in their reports. We certainly do. So we search the state level very high fire hazard severity zone. We search the state responsibility area and the high and very high fire zones in the state responsibility area, as well as the fire zones in the local responsibility areas. So we have you covered. So thanks for bringing that up, John. Okay, Dee Dee, what else do you have for us?
Yeah, this is one I think that's really important that I can certainly address, and please chime in, guys. But Anonymous said, according to CAR, this doesn't have to be done as a point of sale. It can be transferred to the buyer to be done after close of escrow. So the inspection report should not be ordered by the seller. So here's the tricky thing on that. Let's say your buyer does not want to do that. Let's say that you take a listing, and we always recommend that you get your NHD report from MyNHD as soon as you take that listing. These fire issues are not going away. So we need to be able to look on that immediately and see whether or not you're in an AB38 zone or a high fire zone in one of your local areas that might trigger a defensible space inspection. We tell you right there in our report whether that is possible or not. So that's why you want to look at it thoroughly. The other thing is, let's say you take a listing and you wait for the buyer because you're thinking that, oh, we're just going to defer it to them. And then all of a sudden, very quickly, you get an all cash offer. The buyer says, no, I don't want to do that. I want that to be the seller's responsibility. And then you're scrambling to make things work and get the defensible space inspection and understand what's going on the state and local level. And you've just may potentially put your transaction in jeopardy, and your sellers probably won't be so happy about that. So
if I might chime in there.
Prepared and getting, that's why we're doing these webinars, get you prepared to have the best, smoothest transaction that you possibly can and not jeopardize it, because these issues can absolutely jeopardize your transactions.
Absolutely. If I might chime in too, just because we're talking about it, and I have the law sitting in front of me. So Civil Code 1102, you all know, because these are 1102 is the section that talks about disclosures upon transfer of residential properties. So I'm sure you're all in depth and in there. Now, I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a realtor, and I'm not a real estate agent either. So I'm not giving any legal or real estate advice, but what I'll read is the opening line. And it says, on and after July 1, 2021, a seller of real property has to do this stuff. So, and of course, I paraphrase the last part of that, but it's the opening line. After this date, a seller of real property must do this. Now, let me show you where the disclosure or the caveat comes in. In the second section, in section B, Baker, it says, if the seller cannot obtain the documentation of compliance, they may enter a written agreement pursuant to which the buyer agrees, keyword agrees, to obtain the documentation of compliance. Now, again, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a realtor or a real estate agent. So take that to your advisors and ask their interpretation. But that's how the law reads.
Right.
That's
Hey, folks, this is what
1102.19.
we're recommending. If you're a listing agent, if you're representing the seller, and the document exists, right? So the seller holds the prior year's document. So that's why the default lies with the seller. They have to get these inspections performed every year. But to Carr's point, it's something you can negotiate. So if you want to negotiate this, use CalFire FHDS for that purpose and get in touch with the buyer's agent and negotiate the point,
Right.
right? But the default is on you, the listing agent.
Be prepared. You just never know. You don't want to lose that transaction. There are a lot of questions, guys, about fees. And if there is some kind of database on which jurisdiction has requirements for sure. And is there a database of fees? So I'm going to, for all of those who ask those questions, those are really good questions. We're just going to answer all of them online right now. So John, is there a list of counties and cities that do have some type of defensible space or brush requirements when transferring a property or just annually? And do we have a database of fees?
So I'm not aware of a completely comprehensive database, a one-stop shop, so to speak, for every jurisdiction. I have had a lot of success with a website called Municipal Code, it's called Muni Code, but it stands for Municipal Code, and they list almost every jurisdiction in California. There are a few that are not there, but that's a really good one for the vast majority of jurisdictions. And you just type in the search vegetation management ordinance or defensible space ordinance, something of that effect. But a really great option for an agent is contact that local city, the city clerk or the county clerk, just at the standard front office desk at the county or city building. That clerk knows where to access that information. And each agent, you're only going to have to do this once in each jurisdiction to find out. And I know that can be cumbersome and difficult, but Muni Code is the only one I know of that lists most of them. Now, you mentioned fees. CalFire doesn't charge a fee. That's what your taxes go towards. So we do all of our inspections and our documentation and all of this stuff for free, but we don't cover 100% of the state. I mentioned incorporated cities earlier. So you might have a place like, Oakland or Los Angeles or San Diego and places like that, and other smaller jurisdictions, maybe in fact, that have their own fee schedule for this type of activity. So I do know that some of those that I mentioned do have a fee for this process.
Great, thank you. Quite a few questions about HOAs and who's responsible if you're buying a condo or townhome in an HOA, who's responsible for those inspections? Is that something that the HOA takes care of?
Yeah, if you're in a multifamily, more than 4 units, right? So if it's 1 to 4 units, it's each individual owners. If it's more than 4, a commercial building, the defensible space inspection is a responsibility of the association at the condominium, and they're supposed to request them every year and have the inspections performed and keep those certificates on file for all of the property owners in that building.
Right, and it's important, even at the top of the FHDS form, it states what type of property this applies to. And it's important to note that it only applies to residential and only 1 to 4 dwelling units for the property. So it doesn't include these very large 15 different condos in a building type of a situation. It's for that smaller 1 to 4 dwelling units on the property type of residential dwelling.
Excellent. And then there are a lot of questions on the FHDS. And we really shouldn't be giving you advice on how to fill out the FHDS. That is a legal part of your contract. That's a contractual form. At MyNHD, we provide it to you as convenience, as kind of a trigger that, hey, you've got potentially an AB 38 inspection issue here, and you might need to fill this out. So please contact your broker or the CAR legal hotline. You do pay fees for that in your CAR dues. They are there for you, and they will absolutely give you the right answer. If your NHD company or any other vendor out there is telling you how to fill out the FHDS form, I would question that, because they're not part of your transaction. It's your liability on the line, not theirs. So make sure you are getting legal advice on a legal form in your legal contract from a legal professional.
Yeah, good segue too, because we're going to start talking about the home hardening section of this. And again, what we're trying to do is tell you the triggers that alert you that there's a section of the form that you need to be paying attention to. Now, with regards to defensible space, we were showing you sections 3, if you were negotiating who's responsible for that defensible space certificate, section 4, if there's a certificate already on file. Now we're going to talk about home hardening. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again. And the home hardening portion of AB 38, now we're dealing with the structure. And so the qualifying pieces for home hardening, first of all, is the property in any of the qualifying fire zones. That's number one. The second piece of home hardening is when was the home built? And again, if it was built prior to January 1st of 2010, then it qualifies for the home hardening portion of CAR Form FHDS, which is section 2B. That now needs to be filled out. And there's 6 very specific retrofit items that you have to work with the seller to determine if these retrofits have been performed on the property. It's a yes or no question. And I'll move to that form right now. And you can see here's section 2B, and here's 6 retrofit items. This does not mean that if the retrofits have not been performed, that you have to perform them. This is simply notifying the buyer that these retrofits have not been performed. For example, section 2B, number 2, the roof covering is made of untreated wood shingles or shakes. Well, if that's the case, you click yes on this, but I'm not going to go through all of them, right? You have to read all of them. You have to work with the seller and determine which of these retrofits have not been performed on these older homes. The construction codes changed on January 1st of 2010. So if it's a newer home than that, then these retrofits were part of the new construction codes, and you don't have to worry about home hardening. Okay. And one of the things we'd like to point out too is in the MyNHD report, if you're in a qualifying fire zone, at the end of the report, we print out both CAR Form FHDS and the decision tree. So this is going to print at the end of your NHD report if your property is in a qualifying fire zone. So we're giving you the form to fill out along with the how-to. This is the decision tree, which you'll read through this, and this tells you how to fill out each section of the form for your subject property. Okay. So any questions on home hardening and CAR Form FHDS section 2B?
I'm scrolling. There's a lot of questions in here, so I'm going to keep. There's a lot of questions on section 3 of the FHDS.
Specifically?
On section 3 of the FHDS, is this, if this becomes a buyer responsibility, which one should be marked 2 or 3?
So again, we're not going to give you advice specifically on which box to check out. What we're telling you is there's choices for buyer's responsibility and seller's responsibility. And there's also a choice for it's a local jurisdiction, which is where it says local vegetation, or it's a state jurisdiction. So you have to determine, you're representing the buyer, you're going to take responsibility, and it's a local fire department, then you check that box. That's Bayer. Local vegetation would be that particular choice.
That's it for now.
All right, so I'm going to show also just one quick example on the screen share of the extent that we have to go through. This happens to be the Bay Area. I could show this for any particular area, but there's state level fire zones and state responsibility areas. So the state responsibility area is the tan shaded area. That's CalFire's jurisdiction, basically. And then the red area is the very high fire hazard severity zone. So if you're in that red area, you qualify for AB 38. If you're in the tan shaded area, then we also have to look at maps within those areas to see if you're in high or very high fire zones as well. And then to add the local fire zones to this, this is now the blue shaded area. So this is the third level of fire zones that we have to look at, and these properties qualify for the AB 38 disclosures. So again, this is the buyer beware. If you're working with MyNHD, you're covered. You have nothing to worry about. We're looking at every fire map available that qualifies you for these disclosures. But if you're working with somebody else, you better verify with them that they have the local fire maps in their product, that they're not omitting these maps, because it is possible to only be in a local or blue shaded fire zone. So if you're looking at an NHD report that only has the state level zones, it may not tell you that you're in an AB 38 qualifying fire zone, and that would be bad for your transaction. All right, so this is just a little buyer beware segment. Okay.
Right,
So,
and I think, Scott, that kind of segues. I don't know if you were going to go into SB 63 now or soon, or
I'm moving right to it.
yeah.
So
a couple of years ago, SB 63 came through. Sorry if I'm stepping on your toes there, Scott. I was just going to mention that.
Look at this for a segue, John. How's this?
There we go. See, there you
All
are, right there.
So everybody, you thought AB 38 was enough. Well, there was a new law passed January 1st of 2022, and it's called SB 63. So
yeah, and a big thing that this one changes is those local jurisdiction fire hazard severity zones. In the past, we only designated very high fire hazard severity zones in those local jurisdictions, and now it's going to go to all the way to the moderate as well, which includes, so it'll be moderate, high, and very high, just like it is out in the state responsibility areas. So this will certainly apply to more homes. And we're thinking that the new map is going to be adopted sometime early 2024. So this is kind of right around the corner when this will actually be implemented, and more homes will be affected by this particular disclosure and addendum.
So for the audience, nothing is changing currently on CAR Form FHDS, right? As of now, no defensible space inspections are required for these moderate fire zones, but the moderate fire zones are going to be in the new maps, right? And we're going to have those when they're available. We'll incorporate those into our report. So we're thinking early 2024. But the reality is there's more fires. These fires are more severe. It's getting warmer in California. So there's, the laws are changing and they're going to become stricter, right? They're not going to become more lenient. They're going to become stricter. And this will continue as these maps are updated, and as CalFire makes them available to the public, we'll incorporate them into our reports so that we stay current for you and for your needs. Fair statement, John?
Absolutely.
All right, I wanted to go back one slide though, just to show the audience a defensible space certificate, right? So that's one thing we talked about before, when your property gets inspected, what happens? This happens to be the inspection certificate on my property. And the good news with this certificate is right up here in the upper right-hand corner, no violations observed. So this means that my property passed the inspection And they literally, the inspector, and again, John talked about the importance of you being on the property, either the home seller or the agent representing the seller be there with the inspector. Because number one, if there's anything that needs to be, any work that needs to be done on the property, some branches cleared or some brush cleared, the inspector will point it out to you specifically and say, you do this work and I'll pass you. And then if you pass, they hand the certificate to you on the spot. And this is what you need to be in compliance with AB 38. So that's why it's really a good idea to be on site when that inspection takes place. Number one, if you pass, you get the inspection certificate you need. But if you don't, then they point out, everything you need to do to remediate the property. It's all landscaping, right? To remediate the property, to be in compliance, so that you get that passing certificate. And John, if you don't pass and there's work to be done and you get that work performed, how long does it take them to come out and re-inspect?
Well, honestly, it's a little bit of a negotiation there. It's standard to come back in 30 days. But, if you're standing there and let's say they point out that there's some leaves in the gutters and, there's a couple of small branches here and there and maybe a little bit of, they need to mow the lawn. These are things that can get done in maybe 1 day, maybe 2 days. So you can stand there and say, hey, I'll have this stuff all done in the next day or so. Can you come back in 3 days? And the inspector can either, they can give you their availability right then and there and say, yeah, I'll be back in 3 days. But the default is, so if there's no agreement, if no one asks them to come back, they're going to be back in 30 days.
So that's important too. And as you see right here on the form, by the way, here is the name and cell phone number of the inspector right on the form. So they're basically giving you a way, if you're not there in person, they're giving you a way to communicate this. And if you're not there in person, they'll hang this on your fence or somewhere on your driveway somewhere. So, you have to retrieve it. And then the cell phone number is there. So again, just very important that you walk the property with the inspector and you're there to find out if you pass or what remediation on the property is required. So I just wanted to sneak back to that. So again, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it back to Dee Dee for what other questions do you have for us?
Yeah, quite a few. There's quite a few. Thank you everyone for your questions. They're really, really good. We have quite a few, and this is in relation to not all NHD reports, Scott, because all of them are different, but a lot of questions as to, okay, we get our MyNHD report, it says no on the statutory form, but when we go to the local area, it says yes. Do we still need an FHDS? Explain more about that. So for all of you who have asked anything relating to that question, I'm going to dismiss your questions and Scott's going to answer that.
All right, so I'm going to bring up I'm just going to go right to, give me 1 second. I'm going to bring up our sample report. All right, and I'm going to start sharing my screen again. And so here's the MyNHD report. The first page is the invoice. The second page, you see the AB 38 notice. So it qualifies the properties in a qualifying fire zone. All right, now here's the statutory form, and this is referring to that question, and this is what's tricky working with the state of California. The state of California mandates that we have these 2 flood, 2 fire, and 3 seismic disclosures right on the signature page. But that's not all of the hazard layers that we disclose in the NHD report, number 1. And number 2, we have to look at high and very high fire zones in the state responsibility area and local fire zones as well to see if properties qualify. But Sacramento controls this form, so we can't add those other yes/no determinations to this signature page. That's why you have to, first of all, the trigger for being in the fire zone is this page. But when you move past the signature page to the NHD summary, this disclosure report summary, this is where you see here, we put very high fire severity zone AB 38, yes, no. a state of California fire responsibility area, and then a very high fire hazard zone in the SRA, that is another qualifying fire zone for AB 38. It's not on the signature page. And then also down below, supplemental fire hazard severity zone, AB 38 may apply, yes or no. So, and that's not on the signature page because that's a local fire zone. So that signature page is only a summary of state level required hazard disclosures, but there's much more that's in the NHD reports, including 2 other fire zones that we have to look at to determine if the property qualifies. Okay.
Back to me.
Yes.
Thank you. Is an inspection required for vacant land?
Great question. John?
Yeah, that is a great question. So remember, this only applies, this particular item only applies for residential properties with 1 to 4 dwelling units. So vacant properties are not part of this particular subject. And there are also no vacant property requirements in CalFire's defensible space regulations. There may be some local jurisdictions that have regulations that do address vacant properties, but for the most part, in throughout the state, in the SRA, the state responsibility area, there's no defensible space requirement for vacant land, and the applicability there at the top of the form kind of goes over which types of property this applies to.
Yeah, the point of defensible space is to clear fuel off your fire to reduce the possibility of your structure catching fire, right? That's the whole point of it. So if there's no structure on the property, there's no structure to catch fire, then there, CalFire, then you're saying, we don't require it, but some local jurisdictions may. So again, if you're in a local jurisdiction, if you're outside of CalFire's jurisdiction, check with your local fire department, check with the local city ordinance to make sure.
Okay, I think you just answered that question. We've had quite a few questions about local ordinances and vegetation management and how to find that out. So please contact your local jurisdiction. Oh, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, and again, I'll bring it up on the screen just for a second. On our AB 38 advisory page, remember, we're putting your 2 local fire departments right on the bottom here of the page. So this is such a great page to alert you, to give you links to CalFire, and also to tell you where your local fire departments are and the phone numbers for those local jurisdictions. So this is a very important page for all of you.
Yeah. Here's another one about local municipalities. We see many transactions in which the property is in a high fire zone, and the form comes over. I'm guessing they're saying that FHDS form comes over from the listing side with none of the boxes in 3C2 to 6 checked, with the listing agent claiming that 3C1 automatically applies. Aren't most municipalities using the brush management ordinances they currently have in place for their ordinances, making 3C1 not really usable? So again, I'll go back to the fact that you really need to reach out to a broker or the CAR legal hotline for any questions regarding the FHDS form. We are not legally able to instruct you on how to do that. Push back on those listing agents that aren't giving you complete information. They really should be. It's the seller's responsibility and their responsibility to make sure that this information gets to you and the buyer on the buyer's side. But to Chief Morgan, are most having a hard time with that today? Are most municipalities using the brush management ordinances that they currently have in place? Do all of them have local brush ordinances? We're getting that question a lot.
No, actually, they don't all have a local ordinance. So that's an important question, and it's a really great one for like that county clerk or the city clerk to give you the most updated ordinances. You'll also find places, I found a little place up near Yosemite called Mariposa. They created an ordinance long, long ago. And if you're not familiar with how ordinances work, they only apply if they're more strict than state minimum standard. So in other words, if it's not as strict as CalFire's standard, it doesn't apply anymore. It's outdated.
CalFire
so to
standard
speak.
applies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So so it's really important to check on that type of applicability, and your local jurisdiction is going to know, and if it's adopted prior to our last update, which was 2006, then it's a possibility that it's already outdated. But no, the answer to your question, Dee Dee, is most local jurisdictions do have some sort of ordinance or law on the book, but not all. And then, here's the tricky part is that let's say there's that town in up in the mountains near Yosemite, Mariposa, just because theirs doesn't apply. What's that mean? Well, it means that CalFire's state minimum standard applies because that local jurisdiction is still actually located within the state responsibility area. So,
and so again, start with CalFire. CalFire will direct you to stay with them or to move you to the local jurisdictions. And one other thing about the local, municipalities, whether it's a city level or county level, not all of them are requiring inspections. It could be just the fact that they don't have the resources, they don't have money in their budget for inspectors to go out and inspect your property. That's why you want to get that. If they're not requiring them, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing them. It just means they can't do it. So get that in writing or get the person's name you talk to when they're telling you those inspections are not required at this time. And more than likely in the future, they're going to start performing the inspections.
Right. A good question about what if a property can't be brought into compliance without substantially altering the property, like removing decks or protected vegetation. Does CalFire take that into account when they're doing the inspections, Chief Morgan?
Well, we're not going to talk about your construction features. I think I heard the decking around a home and things like that. We wouldn't tell you to remove that, but we certainly could talk about vegetation, whether it be full-grown ponderosa pine trees standing 150 feet tall, all the way down to your ice plant that's growing out there in the next to the driveway. So if it's vegetation, we're definitely going to have something to say about it, recommendations, education, spacing requirements, things like that. But for your construction features, that's a little different. That's with the building department.
Chief Morgan, when do the inspections from CalFire expire?
So a typical inspection, it's an annual inspection process. So you can kind of figure on about a year, and it's kind of an obvious reason because the grass grows back, right? We can cut it, we can trim the brush back, we can take mitigation efforts and try to thin that fuel. But with time, it grows back. So we keep coming back around. Now, for real estate purposes, Civil Code 1102.19 specifically states that the inspection cannot be older than 6 months at the time of the sale. So, so that's kind of, the general answer, and then really keying in on what the law actually is requiring for this purpose.
Right.
Yeah, but if you're in these fire zones, I get my property inspected every year. And to John's point, we cut everything down at the end of the spring, then it stops raining until winter time. So once it's cut down, everything dies and is nothing grows. And then it rains again in December, January, February. it starts growing again March, April, May, and then you go through the cycle all over again. And that's when they come back out to inspect in June. So it's an annual process.
Right. Okay. That one's done.
While you're looking there, there's one question that talks about the agent getting a copy of the report.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you.
And just again, that's where at the bottom of the request form, after you type in the seller's information, it'll ask you if someone's going to be present at the inspection. You'll say yes, and it gives you an option to include the agent. And that's how you would include your email, your phone number, your name in order to be CC'd or copied on that correspondence and actually receive a copy of that report.
Thank you for that. It used to be a little bit different. So for some agents that maybe haven't ordered a defensible space inspection, it's changed over the period of time. Going back to condos and what's required for that, just clarification that condo complexes with more than 4 units do not need an inspection.
That's if the entire unit is being sold. The individual condominium, John, still would need one, correct?
Right. So we can talk about that a little bit. So, you know, if you're in a building, one building, and it has 48 condos in that one building, it's not required for that structure. If you're in a condominium community, so to speak, there might be 100 condos in there, but they're all broken out in these small buildings with 2 or 3, maybe up to 4 in each building. Then those individual condo owners would be responsible for this component, because the condos, it's for residential property 1 to 4 units.
Okay. More clarification. Just to confirm, the CalFire link, where we are supposed to complete the form and get back info on whether or not it's in a high or very high fire, will also tell us if our property has a vegetation ordinance as well.
It's not going to tell you whether or not there's a local vegetation ordinance, but it's going to tell you what jurisdiction the home is located. And if it's in CalFire's jurisdiction, then it falls under Public Resource Code 4291, which is a vegetation law. And then if it tells you you're in a local jurisdiction, then you would reach out to that local jurisdiction. We give you the phone number and the email right there in the confirmation email, and and get that information from the source from that local jurisdiction. And we also forward your information to them so they have your contact info as well. Right. Many times they'll just go ahead and reach out to you and set up either the document transfer or a vegetation inspection, a vegetation management inspection for their jurisdiction.
And a lot of questions have been about, hey, we've reached out to our local fire departments, our local jurisdictions, but they never get back to us. So unfortunately, there's nothing that Chief Morgan can do about that. You have to just—
I'd say go to the city, Dee Dee. I'd say if the local fire department's not getting back to you, then go to the city planning office and go to the clerical team, the admin team, and find out from them. They would know what local ordinances are in place.
That's very true. That is a really great solve. And I've typed in a few times here, if you practice real estate in the same general area, keep a log of this. If you tend to work in, a 10-city radius, you'll want to just keep an Excel spreadsheet, just a little list on what is required and where and who to contact. So this is not going away. We need to be experts in the areas where we practice and really get used to which cities, which jurisdictions are requiring what, and where, if we can, where those boundaries are. A couple of questions, Scott, you might want to help answer. What if the NHD shows the address is not in a high fire zone, but it should be? Who do we contact? And that's really a mapping thing. I'll let Scott chime in too, that NHD companies are all different. And so it's important to use a reputable company like MyNHD, whose mapping is really top notch. But Scott, you have any other additional information on that?
The only comment I would make, if you're working with us, first of all, we've never had an incorrect, determination, and we've never had a claim for one. But if you think that a property, should be in a fire zone and our report's telling you it's not, or more than likely it's another provider, I would reach out to them directly and say, hey, can you verify this? Also, you can go on CalFire's site and put in the address, and CalFire will tell you if the property's in a fire zone or not. So there are remedies here.
Yes.
Right. And there's another question in the chat that talks about that. And yes, the answer to that is our current map in our current link that is actually in this person's question is the current true and accurate map. I did mention that we are updating that map, and when that map is updated and adopted, then we'll update all of our websites with that new information, and the link you have here will show the new fire hazard severity zones.
Right. And yes, to everyone that's attending, if you registered for this, you will get a copy of the link of this recording. So thank you again for attending. And then here's another question, Scott, for you. Do all NHD companies use the AB 38 notice page as part of their report, or is this specifically part of MyNHD? Additionally, we recently had a transaction that showed no on the summary page, but further in the report, it shows that it's a yes in a fire zone. And this really goes back to understanding, and this is why the NHD business is really very complicated. It's so important to use a reputable company like MyNHD because there are different levels of mapping. We have federal and state on the statutory form, and then beyond that, which not all NHD companies have, it goes into your county and city level disclosures. So Scott, explain a little bit more about that.
So first of all, with regards to our AB 38 notification page, we designed that specifically for our report. The intention was to be so obvious for our customers that the property qualifies, and then to give you all the potential information you need, whether you're navigating with CalFire in the state responsibility area or you're navigating with the local fire departments. We give you those local contact information. In addition, we add car form FHDS to the end of the report. It's so obvious that you have additional disclosure requirements that you need to pay attention to. But we're an unregulated industry, so every NHD company is different. There's no regulation outside of that signature page. That's the only page in the report that absolutely has to be the same for all NHD report providers. Everything else, you're at the mercy of that provider. So we're telling you, we talk about our report, we're as comprehensive a report as there exists, right? We have all the local data. And again, we're trying to provide you from an AB 38 perspective with as much information as possible, so you know that you have other responsibilities here.
Thanks, Scott. And we don't have any more Q&A, so we're gonna nip this in the bud before we start getting 50 more questions. So thank you so much to Scott Rockline from MyNHD and Chief John Morgan for CalFire. And
thank you, Chief.
Yes, he is amazing. We're so appreciative. And thank you all for attending today. There were really some amazing questions, and we hope this created greater understanding for you about the fire issues that we face. And please remember, MyNHD really is more than a disclosure company. We are your partner in business, bringing you information like this that will help keep you safe and help you transact more smoothly and transact more. So please remember us for all of your disclosure needs. Until next time, we will see you then. Oh, to get notifications on our webinars and what we have coming up, please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and you'll be notified about all of our great webinars coming up in the future. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.